The Enrollment Act, 12 Stat. 731, enacted March 3, 1863, also known as the Civil War Military Draft Act, was a legislation passed by the United States Congress during the American Civil War to provide fresh manpower for the Union Army, a form of conscription. The controversial act required the enrollment of every male citizen and those immigrants who had filed for citizenship between ages 20 and 45. Federal agents established a quota of new troops due from each congressional district. In some cities, particularly New York City, enforcement of the act sparked civil unrest as the war dragged on, leading to the New York draft riots on July 13 to 16. It replaced the previous Militia Act of 1862. Organization. The Provost Marshal General James Barnett Frye administered the national implementation of the Enrollment Act and answered directly to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Beneath Provost Marshal General Frye were the state acting assistant Provost Marshal Generals. The state Provost Marshal Generals were not authorized by the Enrollment Act, but were appointed personally by James Frye to attend to matters in each individual state. New York and Pennsylvania were the only states that had more than one state acting assistant marshal general. New York had 3 and Pennsylvania had 2. Each state was divided along district lines, with each district under the jurisdiction of an enrollment board. The enrollment boards were headed by a district provost marshal and also included a surgeon and a commissioner. Each enrollment board employed clerks, deputies, and special agents as needed. The enrollment boards divided themselves into sub-districts along ward and township lines. In each sub-district a census was conducted by an enrollment officer to document every man eligible for the draft in the sub-district. Causes of unrest. The policies of substitution and commutation were controversial practices that allowed drafted citizens to opt out of service by either furnishing a suitable substitute to take the place of the draftee or paying $300. Both provisions were created with the intention of softening the effect of the draft on pacifists, the anti-draft movement, and the propertied classes. The result, however, was general public resentment of both policies. The two practices were major points of contention among the general public and led directly to the slogan, "Rich man's war, poor man's fight." Substitution. The policy of substitutions was continued throughout the war. The problem with substitution was that it provided substitutes with powerful incentives to desert soon after enlisting. Career jumpers made a living off of enlisting as a substitute, collecting the compensation, deserting before the units were dispatched to the front, and repeating the process. The problem was well known to the military commanders who regularly saw the same recruits repeatedly. In addition, troops furnished by substitution were considered to be of an inferior quality in comparison to regulars and volunteers. Commutation. Commutation was created in an effort to keep substitution prices low. If commutation were not instated, the price of a substitute would have quickly soared past $300. Also, commutation was intended to raise money for the war effort. While commutation raised war funds, it was often a criticism of the draft that it was better at raising money than troops. The rationalization for commutation was that unwilling troops were ineffective, so the government might as well extract funds from the unwilling if it got poor service. Despite the good intentions behind commutation, it was one of the most hated policies of the war. 1864 Amendment. Congress passed an amendment to the Enrollment Act in 1864. Section 5 limited the length of an exemption from the draft by payment of a commutation fee to 1 year. Then, those drafted were required to serve or to furnish substitutes. 1865 amendment. Congress passed another amendment to the Enrollment Act on March 3, 1865. This is sometimes referred to itself as the Enrollment Act of 1865. Section 21 of the Act imposed denationalization as a penalty for draft evasion or desertion. Justice John Marshall Harlan-II's dissent in Afro-Yim v. Rusk mentioned the Enrollment Act of 1865 as an example of a law in which citizenship could be revoked without a person's consent, and that the Congress then regarded it as constitutional. Bibliography